Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Curious Case. Today, we're diving into two chilling real-life underwater tragedies. One that left men freezing to death in total darkness, and another that pushed divers' brains to the brink at nearly 900 feet below. These aren't just stories of technical failure. They're stories of human limits, overlooked warnings, and the silent dangers that lurk where light can't reach. Let's dive in. The year was 1974, and the North Sea was as brutal and unforgiving as ever. Cold, dark, and merciless, it swallowed ships and men alike without hesitation. Amid this harsh environment, the drill master rig floated precariously on the waves, a tiny outpost of human industry fighting against nature's raw power. On board, two commercial divers, Skippins and Robert John Smith, prepared for what should have been a routine dive. Their task was simple: inspect and repair underwater equipment nearly 320 feet below the surface. Yet, as the diving bell was lowered into the depths, no one could have predicted the nightmare that was about to unfold. Inside the bell, the crushing pressure pressed against them like a silent, invisible force. Above, the surface world faded away, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Everything was calm until the moment everything changed. What followed was a deadly chain of mechanical failure and human error that transformed a standard operation into a fatal disaster. Skippins and Robert John Smith sat side by side inside the diving bell, the metal chamber barely big enough for two men and their gear. Their breaths echoed faintly in confined space, mixing with the soft hum of instruments and the distant sound of waves breaking above. The bell, a lifeline tethered by thick cables, was slowly lowered into the freezing, black water of the North Sea. As the rig's crew carefully controlled the descent, every meter deeper intensified the pressure pressing against the bell's walls. At 321 feet below the surface, the world outside was a void of crushing darkness and cold, where even a flicker of light seemed swallowed whole. Inside, the divers' hearts raced, but their training kept their hands steady. This was their job: to face the ocean's hostile depths and perform repairs that kept the massive oil rig operational. They knew the dangers, they knew the risks, and yet nothing could have prepared them for what was coming. Once the bell reached the target depth, the divers prepared to open the bottom hatch to exit and start their work. At this depth, the pressure inside the bell was balanced with the outside water pressure, allowing the divers to open the hatch safely. But this was also the most vulnerable moment. Suddenly, without warning, the drop weight, a heavy mass attached to the bell designed to control its buoyancy, malfunctioned and released. The bell, now lighter, shot upward with terrifying speed. This was not the smooth, controlled descent anyone expected. What made this disaster even worse was the fact that the bottom hatch was still open. As the bell raced toward the surface, the outside pressure dropped rapidly, but the water inside the bell had an open path through the hatch. The result was catastrophic. The rapidly changing pressure caused bubbles of nitrogen to explode inside the divers' bodies, the deadly bends. At the same time, water flooded into the bell, filling the chamber with cold, suffocating liquid. Skippins and Robert John Smith were caught in a nightmare of crushing pressure, sudden decompression, and drowning, all within seconds. Imagine being trapped inside a metal cage, 321 feet below the ocean surface, with a crushing weight of thousands of pounds of water presses in on every inch of your body. Skippins and Robert John Smith were in this nightmare. The diving bell, their fragile lifeline, had suddenly betrayed them. The drop weight released without warning, and the bell began shooting toward the surface with terrifying speed. But here's the worst part. The bottom hatch of the bell was still open. This meant that as the bell ascended, the immense pressure around them plummeted almost instantly. The physical laws that govern deep-sea diving turned into merciless executioners. Inside their bodies, nitrogen gas that had dissolved under the intense pressure started to violently expand. This is not a gentle process. It's a cataclysmic explosion of bubbles ripping through blood vessels, tissues, and organs. Imagine thousands of microscopic shards piercing your veins and arteries from the inside out. The divers would have felt agonizing pain, the kind that no human should endure. their joints, muscles, and chest tightening with unbearable pressure. Their vision blurred as embolisms formed in their brain, robbing them of consciousness. Panic and confusion must have overwhelmed them in those final seconds. But it was hopeless. Their bodies were fighting a battle they could not win. Water rushed through the open hatch, flooding the bell in a deadly tide. The combination of decompression sickness and drowning struck like a perfect storm. They had no chance to escape or call for help. The cold, dark water swallowed their last breaths as the bell breached the surface. When the bell finally broke the ocean's surface, it was a grotesque sight. The crew on the rig watched helplessly as the metal cage that was meant to keep these men safe had become their tomb. Inside, Skippons and Smith lay motionless, victims of a horrifying accident born from mechanical failure and fatal timing. The horror of that moment will haunt the entire team forever, a stark reminder that beneath the ocean's calm surface lurks a deadly, unforgiving force. As the diving bell erupted to the surface, the crew aboard the drill master rig immediately knew something had gone horribly wrong. The bell's rapid and uncontrolled ascent was far beyond any safe or planned speed. Tension gripped everyone watching. When the bell finally surfaced, hands scrambled to open the hatch. Inside, Skippons and Robert John Smith lay motionless, their bodies slumped in a grim testament to the catastrophic failure that had unfolded underwater. Both men were unconscious and unresponsive. Already dead before rescue efforts could begin, the bottom hatch, shockingly, was still open. This breach allowed the deadly sea water to flood the bell during ascent, mixing the crushing trauma of explosive decompression with drowning. The rapid pressure drop caused nitrogen bubbles to expand violently inside the divers' bodies, tearing apart tissues and blood vessels in a brutal process known as explosive decompression. Death came swiftly and mercilessly. Investigators immediately launched a thorough inquiry. The focus quickly zeroed in on the drop weight system, a crucial safety mechanism designed to control the bell's buoyancy. Examination revealed a mechanical failure had caused the drop weight to release unexpectedly, removing vital ballast and sending the bell rocketing upward uncontrollably. Why the hatch remained open during this deadly ascent became another critical question. Proper procedure demanded the hatch be securely closed and locked before any upward movement, preserving internal pressure and preventing water ingress. It appeared the sudden, unplanned release of the drop weight had thrown the divers into chaos, leaving them unable to close the hatch in time. The combination of mechanical malfunction and procedural breakdown proved fatal. The bell, stripped of its ballast, surged toward the surface while flooded with water, subjecting Skippons and Smith to catastrophic decompression and drowning. It was a chilling example of how a single failure in deep-sea diving can cascade into disaster. The drill master tragedy laid bare the stark dangers of offshore diving in the 1970s, a world where evolving technology met unforgiving natural forces. The accident forced the industry to confront critical safety weaknesses, pushing for better equipment design, stricter protocols, and deeper respect for the risks divers face daily. The drill master accident remains a dark stain in the history of commercial diving, a chilling reminder how quickly life can be snatched away beneath crushing depths. The deaths of Skippons and Robert John Smith were not just tragic losses, but a brutal lesson carved into the very core of the diving community. This accident exposed the raw dangers lurking in every dive, where a single mechanical failure can spiral into an uncontrollable nightmare. The open bell hatch during the rapid ascent was a fatal mistake that turned the bell from a lifeline into a death trap, flooding with water and trapping two men inside as their bodies were crushed by sudden pressure changes and drowning. While the industry quickly moved to upgrade safety measures, introducing fail-safe locks on bell doors and improving emergency procedures, the legacy of those lost is a constant shadow. Every time a diving bell descends into the abyss, the drill master accident echoes as a warning. Beneath the surface, technology can fail, and the ocean is merciless. For divers and crews who risk their lives daily, remembering Skippons and Smith is more than paying respect. It is a commitment to vigilance, training, and never taking safety for granted. Their story haunts the cold, dark waters, a somber testament to the human cost of underwater exploration. In the end, the drill master accident serves as a grim reminder that in the world of deep-sea diving, the line between survival and disaster is razor-thin, and once crossed, there may be no coming back. Off the northeastern coast of Australia, the ocean hides more than just beauty. In the shadows beneath the surface lies an alien world where light disappears and pressure crushes with a force unimaginable to those on land. It was into this world, in 2017, that 3 elite saturation divers descended aboard a dive support vessel operated by DOF Subsea. These were no amateurs. Each diver had logged thousands of hours in the deep, trained to breathe specialized gas mixtures, to work in near-total darkness, and keep calm when the environment around them tried to kill them. Saturation diving is one of the most dangerous jobs on Earth, but also one of the most respected. The pay is high, the skill level unmatched, and the stakes always life or death. On that day, the assignment seemed routine. They were working on subsea infrastructure at depths exceeding 300 feet. The pressure at those depths is over 10 times that at sea level, enough to kill a person in seconds without the right precautions. That's why divers are placed in a pressurized chamber for weeks at a time, allowing their bodies to adapt. From there, they are transported inside a sealed diving bell, dropped into the ocean like a bullet into the abyss. But something was different this time, something no one noticed. The gas mixture inside the bell had been adjusted before descent. Instead of the usual helium-oxygen blend carefully balanced for depth and decompression, this mix had been miscalculated. The helium content was too high. It wasn't an obvious error, not one that triggered alarms or caught anyone's immediate attention. But inside the bell, that mistake was building towards something deadly. As the bell slipped beneath the waves, the pressure increased, and so did the diver's exposure to helium. At high pressures, helium becomes more than just a neutral gas. It begins to affect the nervous system. High-pressure nervous syndrome, HPNS, is a known but poorly understood condition in deep diving. Symptoms include tremors, dizziness, nausea, and hallucinations. It can strike suddenly and without mercy. Inside the bell, the divers began their descent. Communication with the surface was calm, steady, routine. But within minutes, one diver began to act strangely. His breathing quickened. His hands trembled. A second diver reported confusion and dizziness. The third began vomiting inside his helmet. None of them realized the full extent of the danger. The symptoms were subtle at first, easy to misattribute to stress or fatigue. But in reality, their bodies were being poisoned by the very air they were breathing. They were trapped in a silent, invisible emergency, and no one above had any idea what was happening. At over 300 feet below the surface, the dive bell had become a prison. What was supposed to be a controlled environment, a capsule of life within the crushing dark, was now a deadly trap. Inside, the 3 divers were suffering. The diver who had first shown symptoms was now twitching violently. His speech slurred over the intercom, incoherent at times, a twisted mix of fear and confusion. The bell operator topside could hear it. Something was wrong, very wrong, but the data showed no technical failure. No equipment alarm had triggered. Everything looked fine on the surface. But inside the bell, the men were unraveling. The second diver tried to help his partner, pulling at his harness, checking his gauges. But he couldn't keep his balance. His own hands trembled too much. His vision blurred, and every time he moved his head, a wave of vertigo crashed over him like a storm. He gripped the sides of the chamber just to stay upright. That's when the panic set in. He started to shout over the comms, not with words, but with raw sound. Moaning, yelling, gasps and sobs. His breathing grew faster, louder. In a chamber where oxygen must be measured and controlled to the milliliter, that kind of hyperventilation is a death sentence. Then one of the divers collapsed. His body went limp, floating awkwardly in a small space like a rag doll. The other 2 didn't even have time to react. One was curled in a corner, dry heaving and shaking. The other was trying to activate the emergency return system, but kept pressing the wrong buttons, his brain unable to process the controls. This was HPNS, but pushed to the extreme. Their brains were drowning in helium. At these pressures, helium doesn't behave like it does at sea level. It seeps into nerve cells, disrupting signals, twisting perception, amplifying fear. Topside, the surface crew finally realized something was horribly wrong. The divers weren't responding to commands. Their speech was unintelligible. One of the men monitoring the situation reported hearing what sounded like laughter, unhinged, hysterical laughter from 300 feet beneath the surface. No one was laughing at that bell. The control room went into emergency mode. They initiated a rapid recovery. The mechanical arm began to pull the bell up inch by inch, but even that was too slow. At this depth, you can't just yank divers to the surface. Decompression sickness, the bends, would kill them if the HBNS didn't do it first. They were trapped between two deaths: the slow breakdown of their minds and bodies from the gas inside the bell, or the explosive consequences of surfacing too quickly. By the time the bell broke the surface, silence had fallen. Not the silence of pressure or malfunction, the silence of death. When the dive bell finally breached the surface and was hauled aboard the support vessel, everything stopped. The crew rushed in, emergency medics standing by. But the moment they opened the hatch, the weight of horror hit them like a wall. Inside, the air was heavy, stale, and 3 men lay motionless. 2 were already gone. Their bodies were eerily still, eyes half open, skin pale and cold. The third was breathing, barely, shallow, erratic gas that didn't sound human anymore. His pupils were dilated. He didn't recognize anyone. His brain had suffered massive neurological trauma from pressure and the wrong gas mixture. HBNS, which typically causes tremors and confusion, had been supercharged in this dive. What should have been a manageable condition had turned catastrophic because of a critical, invisible error in the gas system. Somewhere along the line, the helium-oxygen mixture used to pressurize the bell had been miscalculated, possibly contaminated, possibly imbalanced. At 300 feet, even a small deviation in the ratio of gases can push the human body past its limits. The survivor was rushed to a decompression chamber, stabilized, and eventually returned to the surface. But his recovery was slow, incomplete. He could remember fragments, moments of sheer terror, a voice yelling, his own hands trembling. But much of the event was a black hole in his memory. For the families of the 2 dead men, there were no answers, only bodies. An investigation followed. Of course, DOF Subsea cooperated fully. Technical records were pulled, dive logs reviewed, equipment tested, and still, the final report could only conclude what those on board already knew. A mix of HBNS, a gas mixture fault, and human limitations had created a lethal cocktail. No explosions, no flooding, no visible drama, just silence. This wasn't the kind of diving accident that made headlines with fire and steel. It was worse. It was quiet, intimate. It happened inside their minds, turning professionals into victims of their own environment. In the end, 3 men went down. 2 never came back whole. 1 survived, but left a part of himself in that chamber. A part that never made it to the surface. And for the rest of the crew, for every diver who still signs up to work saturation jobs in the dark belly of the sea, it's a reminder. Down there, the ocean doesn't have to crush you to kill you. Sometimes, it just waits for you to breathe